Welcome to the New York Information Security Meetup / the Cyber Guild. It's December the 16th, just before the holidays, just a few minutes past noon, so lunchtime. So keep your microphone mute if you're eating, but be more than welcome to put in some question here in the chat line. So John Prokap, I have the great pleasure to have you on probably for the second time, I think, in a couple of years. You participated in the security, the CISO security podcast with Dave Spark back in New York City when things were still open.
That was February of last year, so it's been a while, but good to see you.
Yeah, absolutely. But it feels like a lifetime away. It feels like longer.
Feels like 10 years ago, yes.
Sometimes I see photos and, like this day, last year, and I was like, oh my God, is that what we did before? Like we actually had, we had social gatherings and so on. We traveled and we met and we presented and so on. So anyway, welcome. So what I'd like to do is to dive a bit about your kind of background, how you came to kind of the cybersecurity space. What are you working on? And then just pick your brain on current events and just trends in the industry. I know you've been doing some very senior roles, and including hiring and building teams, which I would like to touch upon. Something related to with the current events and so on. So we'd love to kind of dive into that. So why don't we jump right in? And how did you get into IT and IT security? What was kind of your career path that you took?
Different questions. I was a year out of school, and a friend of mine was doing desktop support, and he said his company, which was a consulting company for one of the big telecom providers, said, we need to hire people left and right. You're good with computers. And I said, okay. And at the time I was selling computers over the phone, and I wanted to do something that wasn't salesy. Interviewed, passed all the technical tests, went in and just learned on the job. And from there, I went on to systems administration, network administration. I did some project management. And then in 2001, I was consulting for a company where they had me on the network side of things, but they had a major security incident as a result of a worm. It had taken their network essentially offline for 3 or 4 days. And I was one of the few people who figured out that it was an attack and not just an equipment malfunction, and had a very long diatribe about, here's what you need to do to secure these things. And, if anyone remembers that far back, things were much more primitive in terms of security controls. It was, yes, we have a firewall. Yes, we have antivirus, but they weren't properly configured. There was no vulnerability assessment. There was no risk management, let alone anything resembling a modern risk register. And the CIO basically said, why don't you figure this out for us? And gave me a month to come up with a short document, which ended up being about 50 pages with a executive summary deck. And then they later hired me to be the information security manager, and then later build out their HIPAA program. They were a healthcare company. And from there, it was pretty much one thing after another. I built out the program there. I've run security and networking for an insurance company. I had a brief detour as a sales engineer. I was a consultant and built out a healthcare security practice for a large multinational. And most recently, I was the CISO at HarperCollins Publishers. So it's just been a building upon my previous experience and moving from role to role. And I built most of my initial experience in IT proper, and then moved over into information security manager. So I have the interesting position of having run information security programs for almost 2 decades without ever having been an information security analyst or engineer.
Yeah, and it's a pretty amazing path, as you actually had a hands-on experience and you moved to management where you actually had kind of a managerial / strategy kind of roles. But when growing up, did you have interest in technical subjects like like high school? There's always stories about your parents getting you a PC at early days, and then like you're like taking this apart. Is that something like you did as well?
Well, if by a PC you mean a Commodore VIC-20,
you're dating yourself.
Oh no, I had some mentorship calls the other day, and they asked me about my early experiences, and I had explained what happened. What's NetWare? Let's not go into that because that could take a while. But Yeah, my father is he's retired now, a chemical engineer. So he was always technical, but not computer technical. And I kind of decided I wanted to do something that was different technical than chemical engineering. My mother was a nurse, and so both educated, and they wanted me to do something technical with my life. My dad did want me to be an engineer, which was a funny story when I was titled as network engineer, and he pointed out, "You're not an engineer." And I don't know if anybody still gets this, except maybe from my father, but there's four general qualifications to be an engineer. One is you have an engineering degree, you have your PE, you are a licensed boiler operator, or you're licensed to drive a train. He was the first three of those. So whenever I would, John Prokap, network engineer. No, you're not. You're a network person. You're a network admin. You do network stuff. You play with routers, but you're not an engineer.
Don't they have like the that ring, the engineering ring that's supposedly made out of some bridge or some sort, where they remember that the engineering is something that basically saves lives, or it can really hurt people.
I think there might be more civil engineers, but I've heard of that, although that's not something that was a thing in our family.
But and it's funny because you're right. The engineering term is loosely defined. Now everything is engineering. It's like
right. You write code. You're a software engineer. I mean, if you have an electrical engineering degree and you write code, but I mean, it's not as big of a deal as some of the more like if you have a PhD or an MD, you can call yourself doctor. If you have an engineering degree, obviously you can call yourself an engineer, but a lot of other people call themselves engineer. And I really never thought it was that big of a deal, but fortunately you've got me on here and not my dad.
So how did you keep up? So you had this hands-on experience and then you moved to management. How did you make sure that you keep your, skills up to date? It's something that I came across a couple of times where, you start to, look at a bigger picture and then you're no longer doing the nuts and bolts, and kind of like you lose touch with some of the technologies out there because things are moving so fast.
Yeah, and there's a really good argument for saying that CISOs shouldn't be too technical, but you need to be technical enough. It's an inch deep and a mile wide is probably the best way to put it. That what your teams are telling you is accurate, and not, hey, we found this SQL injection. You got to know what a SQL injection bug is. Or vulnerability. You can't just be like, oh, I don't know. If it's in the OS top 10, you have to know what those are conceptually. You don't have to be able to code them out. My background was not really in development. I could write a web page if you were having the world's ugliest web page contest, because my UI's never been great. And I'm not a tight coder, but I'm a network engineer and a systems engineer by training. So it's one of those things like, how do you let go? We have 5, 6, 7 major consoles in front of us, and how much access do you as the head of the program have versus your team of analysts and engineers? And what the difference between an analyst and engineer is, that varies with every organization. But basically, if you know enough to be dangerous, you probably don't want to be global admin, but you may want to have a reporting function so you can generate reports or something without asking your team for minuscule things. But if it's something that's going to take a few hours of analyst time, it's probably a task that's best delegated. So you kind of have to balance keeping up with the tools that you use and the tools that you used to use, and just being able to have a smart conversation about that. But also, you're really in needing to be more business focused. You don't just want to be someone who's the nerd, because you need to take and I say that with love. I consider myself a nerd. I don't want anybody thinking, oh no, he made fun of nerds. But you want to make sure that you can take that engineering speak, the nerd speak, translate it to plain English for the business, translate it to executive speak, and summarize it at each level, versus necessarily being the best person at administering a firewall, or setting up BGP on a router, or troubleshooting a specific threat hunting exercise. You need to be doing the high level functions like designing and managing a program, putting together the security strategy, roadmap, budget, arguing and collaborating with the executive team to make sure that those items get executed. There's no point in having a great governance if the CEO says it's stupid and doesn't want to back it. If they're on board, you're more likely to get budget. You're more likely to get cooperation when you put in new policies. So you really have to balance that out. And traditionally, a lot of CISOs have stayed technical. But if you look at the evolution of the CIO, for example, most CIOs are not as technical as their engineers. They understand why we're using this ERP system and its applicability to the business, and they can have those conversations. We're putting in a new financial system. They're sitting down with the CFO and the CFO's directs to go over the strategy, and his or her team is executing that vision. And a CISO has to be more like the CIO, but for security and risk, not for enterprise apps. And that's kind of the challenge you face. Is it's a juggling act. It's an art as far as how technical do I stay versus how do I need to evolve to become more valuable to the business.
And it's interesting because you actually, I'm assuming you had to learn how to communicate as a C-level executive, how to communicate to other executives. There's really no manual for that. Can you tell me, this is something you, as you advance up the ranks, so to speak, and start to interface with these executives, you then had to kind of learn on the job, right? How to deliver that value, right? As a CISO, right? How to communicate value? How do you communicate these basically business ideas? Can you just give me an idea of what did you learn, and what did you learn quickly in terms of the communication? What's important to these executives, and especially from a kind of cybersecurity perspective?
I'll give you two sets of examples. One is from a general standpoint, bad news does not age well. So I always, at first this was painful. You always open up with bad news. My executive summary every month is incidents. Here's what went wrong. And then the next slide is how we remediated, if it's a minor, one person got ransomware on one PC and we replaced it, that doesn't need a full write-up. What went wrong? How does this impact us? If it was significant enough, they've already seen an executive note from me in the interim, or we've already had a phone call. But just being able to escalate that bad news quickly helps build a lot of trust. Not the first time, because it's, oh no, you're that guy who complains about everything. But after a while, it's, here's the thing that's happened. My team's on top of it. We've engaged comms or finance or HR, depending on what the incident is. We're not going to engage everybody necessarily. If it's a global problem, like some companies are having right now, perhaps. But if it's something that's targeted, like if there's an employee issue, HR and legal are involved. If there's a defaced website, that you would involve comms. You want to just assure the executive team that you're on top of the problem. And the other piece is, and this is impossible to bullet point or to lay out, is you really have to learn the personalities of who you're dealing with. Certain people want to receive information in certain ways. I've worked with CEOs who are matter of fact, very straightforward to deal. I won't say easy, because they are CEOs and they will hold you to a high standard, but straightforward to deal with. And then there are others, it's like the riddle of the Sphinx when you walk into their office. So you just have to learn what they're like and what to be ready for. And obviously your CEO, CFO, COO, general counsel, head of HR, and then your major heads of business lines are most important to learn their personalities. And then pretty much anyone in the business you interact with regularly, you want to have a good relationship. But it's that upper level of the business, and then the heads of support functions. And I define that as, besides IT, InfoSec, HR, finance, legal, if there's a separate compliance department, comms, corporate communications. Those are the orgs that you really need to work well with, because you're all there, you're all important, but you're not core to the business, generally speaking. If you're a PR firm, corporate comms is core to the business. If you're an accounting firm, finance probably is too, but generally speaking, you're all there to support whatever the business enterprise is. So you have to learn their personalities and work together with them.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's a, again, it sounds almost like a soft skills, as opposed to, we didn't even talk about technology at all, or the actual core, of the incidents themselves. It's how to deliver those. You don't deliver the issue without providing the resolution for it, right? And then you have to like mash yourself well with the executives' personalities, and those are very soft kind of skills, right?
Well, yeah, the CEO generally doesn't care what firewall you use. They don't care what EDR if you've got Cylance or Carbon Black or CrowdStrike or anything else that begins with a C, Is it blocking our stuff? Are we inhibited from doing work? Are we being protected? Is it impinging on our privacy rights because the systems can see a lot? Those are the questions they care about more than what's going on in the console. Now, if somebody has a specific incident and there's technical detail, you have to really decide how much of that gets added as a footnote versus how much of that is, hey, we found this really interesting thing, and now if you'll indulge me, I'll take 5 minutes to get a little technical and walk you through what happened if you want. If he's pulling out his phone and falling asleep, you can read it on your own time. You really have to read the room. And the technical pieces get a little bit more tactical. That's how the things get done. What we're trying to accomplish and what the impact on the business is generally more important. The how, it's important, but not necessarily important to that audience.
Yeah, and John, when you went up the ranks as well, your liability, right? Your responsibility levels went all the way up there. So, there's a notion now that that CISOs require almost have a kind of like a legal advice in their back pocket. What's your take on that?
One, make really good friends with your legal team. You should have been doing this anyway to get your job done. Two, if you're a CISO, try to get yourself included on the executives and officers, the E&O insurance. So if there is an event and the company is sued and they name you, you're covered. Also, I carry personal umbrella liability protection. I never advocate for insurance first, but considering it's reasonably priced compared to somebody hitting you with a multi-million-dollar lawsuit, you really have to do your own risk management and look at your own threat model as you go into these sorts of roles. I've never heard of an analyst getting sued, but more recently, we've seen criminal charges with, I think the example I'm speaking of at Uber. And that's a very unfortunate situation. I don't want to comment on the specifics, but those are the sorts of things where you want to be careful yourself that you're doing the right thing legally in addition to doing the right thing by the company.
Yeah, and it's something that's not typically covered. And this is why I appreciate you bringing this up, that there's ways to protect yourself. And I think eventually, if you're doing the right thing, right, to protect the business, and you have the kind of as the track record and the kind of trails of evidence that you've done all of that, you shouldn't be worried. You're doing your job. This is not, and there's a force majeure where, when things like, like SolarWinds, for example, blows up,
that's a bit of a different story. I'm talking about a situation where if you think the right thing is X and your executive team tells you Y, you need to, and I've had this fortunately, I haven't been in this position. Yes, I don't always agree with everything my bosses tell me. Who does? But generally, we're able to work something out. I've spoken with other CISOs who, obviously, I'm not going to name here, but one was telling me he was regularly documenting what his CIO was telling him to do and his objections over the risk of what the path they were taking and his alternate recommendations. And it was emails, kept copies of the emails, printed out copies of the emails just in case you're going to fire him for cause type of situation, or there was a liability incident as a result of that advice not being followed. Yeah. And it's unfortunate, but sometimes you have to do that.
Yeah, and that's true for some other professions as well. So sometimes you got to keep track of what you're doing and just have some sort of plan B, or kind of cover your ass, if you wish, CYA type of thing, to make sure that that things go along your way. So kind of shifting gears a little bit. I'd like to talk a bit about things you've said in the past couple of years about attracting talent, getting the right people for the job, because you build teams and various different roles. Do you find even today, with kind of the COVID-19, is there still shortage of cybersecurity professionals, or is it something that is a shortage of the kind of wrong kind?
It depends, and I have a different perspective because right now I'm doing some independent consulting while I'm between CISO jobs. But when I was hiring, it was always a struggle to find exactly who you wanted at the budgeted price. And what I'm seeing in the market today, and I'll get back to that in a second.
Yeah.
What I'm seeing in the market today is, and I've spoken with a few people who are quote unquote entry level, and I'd argue that there are very few entry level roles in security. If you want to go, and I'm cribbing what Alan Alford said on another podcast, but basically, except for MSSPs and except for very large companies, there aren't a ton of intro roles. You want to junior roles, sure, but they generally have some other form of experience. So if you now I'm paraphrasing myself off of a LinkedIn post earlier in the week. If you want to work in SecOps, work in general IT operations or a support desk for a while. If you want to work in GRC, risk audit, perhaps working for a GRC company for a couple of years to get that experience. Programmers are key to becoming a product security, because if you don't understand code, you're not going to be a very good product security or application security engineer. But at the high end, I'm finding CISO roles are a little tight right now. A lot of companies are adverse to pull the trigger on that. There's a lot of tire kicking, testing the waters, that sort of thing. And then obviously in the middle, there's a lot, that talent gets grabbed up really quickly. Every time I know somebody who's an AppSec engineer, they seem to be on the market for a couple of weeks and then they're working somewhere else. So it really depends on what level you're at. But
so it's not across the talent shortage is not across the board.
No, I think it's specific. And when I was hiring, I've sometimes had to get a little creative. So I needed a GRC lead, couldn't find somebody who had exactly the experience, but there was a candidate who had been a product manager at a GRC company, and they manufactured a GRC platform. So he understood how these things worked. So I figured easier to hire him than go way out of my budget or way out of our scope. And he turned out to be an excellent hire. I've had times where you get people who are like one-person shops at small companies and they're looking to move up. They make excellent security ops people, because especially in a smaller team, they wear a ton of hats. If I were running a 500-person team, they'd have to get used to the specialization. That would be a concern, and it's something I would carry on in the interview process.
Yeah, it's super interesting. You also mentioned that we're trying to find the best talent, but we don't want a homogeneous workforce.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you recall you saying that. What do you mean by that? You pride yourself like providing diversity to the workforce, right? To hire people from all kind of walks of life, and then
as best I can, but also diversity of thought. I had a conversation with a friend yesterday, and she was telling me that company thought she was extremely qualified for the role, but didn't fully buy into the company mission. And I was like, okay, so you want to hire zealots, and then you want to wonder why you don't have diversity of thought. It's an interesting bit of feedback, I think, that sometimes people get. Like, yeah, if you're going to go work for American Cancer Society and you want to smoke in the office, that's not a fit. But if I'm just making up a hypothetical example here.
I'm sure they have smoking rooms, smoking sections within their offices.
I don't imagine that they do. and that sort of thing, so when people say cultural fit, you have to be very careful that. I mean, I tend to like to say more of team player, and a team player is not just there to support the team, but also to contribute and somehow mold the team a little bit too. Because one of the things I find myself saying in staff meetings is, hey, this is what I think we should do. Or these are some things we're doing. These are at the exec level, but I'll just give you the 5-second overview. And then these are the next level strategic initiatives we're doing. Tell me if I'm wrong. Tell me how I'm wrong. Because I think I'm pretty smart. I think I know what I'm talking about, but I know I'm not perfect. So I hired smart people so that they can tell me how we can do things better. Not necessarily to just sit there and go, yeah, John, you're brilliant. Let's do that. Great. Okay, I feel great, but is this going to work? You have to be able to step up and say, okay, I think there's a better way we can do this, or why are we doing it this way?
So how do you measure that? How do you know that the people you hire are actually going to stand up for you and say, you're a big guy, you're a 6 foot what, 6 or something? I'll be
I'm
afraid
6'8", yeah.
yeah.
No,
So I'll
but
be afraid to come up and say, "Hey, John, you're wrong. This is how we should do it."
okay. We're not on the streets of North Jersey here. We're sitting down in an office, Dave.
I'm joking, but how do you
I know, but
how do you measure that during the conversation when you're about
it's
to
a
hire?
conversation. It's something you have to feel for, and yes, sometimes you get people who are, and I'm not saying don't hire people because they're shy, because look, a lot of great people are introverts.
Yeah.
But you have to tell them, like, give me an example of where you disagreed with a superior and how you went about doing it. And if you just shouted and called the guy an idiot, that's not what I'm looking for either.
Right.
But and that's something that I have to do on a regular basis, is tell people their baby is ugly. You've this is a great program, but here's some steps we need to do to reduce risk. Here's some steps I can help with, my team can help with. Here's some things that you need to look at. If you get, and this is a silly example, but the marketing team comes to you and says, we're doing a survey. Okay, what are you collecting? Blah, 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 blah. Are you collecting information on people under 13 because of COPA, not CCPA, COPA. Okay, great. What else are you collecting? Oh, we want to collect social security numbers. No, don't do that. There's no legitimate business reason to do that. And you have to have that conversation. In the similar vein, your team, if you're CISO, director of InfoSec, whatever your title is, has to be able to escalate issues to you and point out deficiencies in your own thinking, in your own program. Because I can put together a really pretty PowerPoint slide that I think is good, but there may be some technical reason, or there may be just something I've missed, because there's a lot going on. And as we talked about earlier, how do you keep on top of everything? And part of that is relying on the people you've hired to be smart and to speak up when it's time to speak up. And it's an interesting conversation in an interview, because some people are very much, they want to get the job. Well, we've all been there,
Yeah.
You don't want to be, I'm just going to tell you to do everything wrong. Well, no, that's not going to work either, but it's more of an art than a science.
Makes total sense. So there's a question here. You had a short detour at a vendor. And what's interesting about that, and somebody's asking like how that experience kind of, added to your career path. And just again, from my experience, I saw some comments you made, LinkedIn posts and so on, about kind of the relationship between enterprise and vendors. And some of these, go astray. And I think that your perspective, because you've been on the other side, gave you some insight in terms of that process. Maybe you can expand on that if you wish.
Right. I'll get to that in a second, but there's one other way that experience has helped me. And that is, you're always selling. You're selling your program up. If you're a CTO, if you're a CISO, if you're a CIO, and I imagine it's the same in other department heads, but I haven't worked that closely with them. I've seen that part of the struggle as well. You're selling up, and you're trying to convince the executive team, here's why we want to make this policy change. Here's why I need an extra $200,000 to implement some security controls. Here's why we have to make this change, but we can't make it in, say, Germany because of their privacy rules or their works council. There's a sale to that, and having that background, I think, helps with that. But more importantly, when you interact with the vendors, you know where they're coming from. And some of it is an empathy. I understand your struggle and this, that, and the other. And some of it is, I know your shenanigans. You work for a reseller, you see, you know how the gross margin game works. You know how sales funnels work. You know how some of their relationships and deal registration works. Like, oh, we want to talk to you first. No reason. It's like, well, yeah, so they can register the opportunity, and they'll always win on pricing, even if you want to work with somebody else. So there's some gotchas there that kind of come out. And I've seen this, I know the game, and I can have that straightforward conversation with the rep. If I'm starting to build that relationship of trust, if it's somebody who's just, all right, this first call is a waste of my bleeping time, we're not going to get there. But when if I get there with a rep or with a reseller, I'll have an honest conversation with them. Like, here's where I need to be. If you can't get me there, this isn't going to work. If I've got $100,000 to fix problem X, and you fix problem X 80% and you cost $350, we're not going to get there.
So that's actually, I mean, I'm sure they really much appreciate it. You save them a lot of these, empty cycles, right?
The smart ones do.
Yeah, because you get to the point right away. So,
You do get some people who like, I don't know how many times somebody said to me, "Oh, we'll just have to sharpen our pencils on this." I'm like, "You're gonna have no pencil left by the end of this conversation."
it's
Yeah,
something like people are starting to get, to get on top of it. I saw somebody saying, hey, we can't do, if you can't do 1 year, because some vendors say, oh, you can't do 1 year, we can only do 2 years or 3 years. And they say, well, you're going to have 0 years because you're not going to get the transaction, right? So people are starting to catch on.
Here's a little secret for all the salespeople out there. Those kind of tactics 10 years ago, maybe they work. Nowadays, we all talk. There are Slack channels that have hundreds of CISOs in them, and we'll say, hey, I spoke with so and so, and they're telling us they can only do a 2 or 3 year renewal. And somebody will be like, yeah, I don't know where you're hearing that because we just did a 1 year renewal in June. And now you go back and make your rep look stupid. Because before you were on your own. It was you had to buy X. Oh, we need this, that, and the other. Come on, you only do 3 year renewals. Of course, back in the old days, you would buy product and then renewal was 20%, 15%, unless it was like antivirus and you pay more because of the definitions and everything. But nowadays, with SaaS models, it's basically full price. I mean, it's lower than the initial CapEx investment generally, but it's full price every year. If you're buying a cloud-based SaaS security solution or enterprise solution, it's if it's $250 or $2 million, that's your annual bill. And sometimes, you'll do a 3 year deal to knock that down a little. But one of the beauties of SaaS is, generally speaking, if for example, I'll use a CASB because that's really easy to implement. It actually does take it says 5 minutes, but let's say it's a couple hours of planning and everything. Well, because I can implement it in a couple hours, I can get rid of it in a couple hours too. So maybe I want to buy that for a year, see how good it is. As somebody who's gone through multiple CASBs, I know this experience, and then I can, and if it's good, I'll renew. So if you gave me an option, like if you said, hey, we stand behind our product. If you buy it for a year, we'll talk to you in 6 months. And if you want to renew for years 2 and 3, we'll give you the 3 year pricing. That's something I'd be open to, but not, just try it out for 3 years. That could be miserable.
I love it. I love it that you open up the kimono a little bit for like decision making, as a CISO. So what excites you, as you transition to your new role, what excites you in kind of the future, CISO role, and how, because it's all ever evolving, right? I mean, just as technology is evolving, the roles and responsibilities for CISO are evolving. So what excites you in kind of like if you have the kind of a future, like a crystal ball in terms of what that is going to look like 12, 18 months from now. And then maybe the flip side of it, what scares you, right? What's, from that perspective, you get into a new role, and then, what keeps you up, just transitioning to that.
Well, it's always exciting building a new program or going into a program, doing that evaluation and just, making your stamp on it. I mean, obviously you're making it for the business. It's not, okay, here's the John Prokap security program, blah,
is
blah,
that
blah,
the
blah.
John Prokap rip and replace, or is it
no, it's the John talks to the existing team, IT, the other parts of the organization, and the exec team, and figures out what the main risks are and aligns the program to that. Because the office of the CISO is not there for the CISO. It's there for the business and to reduce the business risks. So, but that to me is an exciting process, getting to meet everybody, getting up to build or rebuild or tune the governance, adjusting the strategy. The stuff that worries me are, if you've watched the news this week, those are the sorts of things that worry you. Your vendor that everybody uses gets hacked in their supply chain, and now you've got a backdoor that a foreign adversary can get into. The nation state attacks, they're way more sophisticated than the typical attacker is. They're very patient. They're willing to do things. The math involved in trying to compute you know, a factor to steal a cookie, to impersonate a cookie so you can get around two-factor authentication. That's not something that some script kiddie on his, bed in his mom's basement is figuring out. That's something that takes sophistication and takes planning and takes investment. So yeah, those are the sorts of things that worry you. But what also is worrisome is those are the 1%, the top 1% or the top 1% of 1% of the attackers. So you really have to make sure that your basics are covered first. Do you have good patch hygiene? Is your perimeter, huge asterisk on perimeter, because that can be anywhere now. It can be in the cloud, it can be the endpoint, it can be the data, it can be identity. And there's, we could have a 2-hour philosophical debate on where the perimeter lives today. Is that known and secure? Do you know what your assets are? Do you know of your assets? Do you know the criticality? Yes, all your computers are important assets, but where do the crown jewels live? Is your network segmented, or can everybody talk to everybody else? Those sorts of things need to be solved first before you start worrying about Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, or even some of our allies trying to steal your trade secrets.
Yeah, it's a tremendous insight. And you know what? We're coming to the top of the time allotted here. This was great. A really tremendous insight. I would love to, to find out how do people engage with you, right? You're very involved. You're as a mentor. You contributed back to the community. You also do consulting. Like, what's the best way to reach out to you? And also, for the folks that are reaching out to you, what's the kind of in your perspective, your ideal, opportunity?
Well, I would say the one-stop shop to hit me up is LinkedIn. And if you send me a connection request, please include a note so I know who this is, because I do get a lot of, I'll call them spam requests, like trainer at freelance. That is not getting accepted. So, if it looks like you're trying to sell me something right off the bat, I can't read your profile that well necessarily. 2 sentences, 3 sentences. Tell me why, what you're looking for. If you're looking for a mentorship opportunity, I still have some cycles on that. If you are interested in me doing some consulting work, definitely I'd be interested in having that conversation. I mean, one thing that I had talked about, but I haven't had the opportunity to do, was when you have companies that they want to start a security program, and they're like, well, do we hire a CISO? Do we hire a vCISO? And they're so not there yet that they don't even know where to start. And these are the companies that end up putting a job rec out there, putting their toe in the water, interviewing 20 candidates, and then not hiring any of them. And now it's like, okay, good luck. If you really want to sit down for a month or 2 months or 3 months, and not every day, but to step through and go over what the key risks to the organization are. What are your compliance drivers? Understanding the risk and compliance, building out a governance model, and saying, okay, you're a small company, so maybe you need a vCISO, somebody 2 days a week, 4 hours each time, to collaborate with your project management group, with your heads of IT, with legal, and help them march forward without actually having a full-time person on staff. Or you're a larger organization or a risky organization, and size is not an absolute number, because if you take a 50-person hedge fund, they should probably have a CISO. If you take a 50-person generic company, maybe a vCISO or whatever. 500 people is a big maybe too, depending on industry. If you need to build out a program with full-time staff, what does that look like? And what are the criteria for hiring a CISO? Those are the sorts of things I think I could help a company with a lot, because I've been there, I've built out the programs. And also, if somebody has recently been hired into a CISO role, or has been there a while and wants someone to take a look at their org and give them a sounding board, whether it's one-on-one conversation or to look through their org chart and say, why do you have 52 AppSec people and no one in ops and no one in GRC? And yes, you are going to have organizations. Like a friend of mine is a CISO at a technology company, and they're product based, and their company, this is a small company, but his org is 15-20% of the company, which is unheard of, but because of what they do and how baked in security is to their organization. And yes, they're DevOps and AppSec heavy, but that's because they're delivering a product that has to be secure, so that has to be baked in. But if you're an enterprise org, you can't ignore AppSec, but it's typically not 70% of your InfoSec headcount. So You know, so if you
Absolutely.
have those sorts of questions and you want somebody to walk through them with you, happy to help. Reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Awesome.
Set
Thank
up
you
a
very
call.
much, John. And thanks for everyone for joining. This has been great. I feel like we could have gone on for another, 40 minutes. I hope that we'll get the chance, to do so very soon, maybe in New York City. Next time we'll do
let's
another
hope,
session.
let's hope next year, maybe middle of the year, we can all get together.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And have a great holiday if I don't talk to you. And thanks all for joining again, and looking forward to seeing you all next time. Take care.
Thanks,
Thank
David.
you.
Thanks, everyone. Happy holidays.